Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to have a look at the difference between epidemics and pandemics. And this specifically relates to the two dot points that you're seeing on your screen now. The first one in regards to the emergence of new pathogens and re-emergence of known pathogens. That links closely to the difference between epidemics and pandemics. And then the second dot point here, we're looking at how we can control the spread of different pathogens once we are able to identify what the pathogen is, making sure that it's going to have minimal impact on us as humans and the rest of our population. We're going to start off today by you guys having a quick look at this 2-minute video on YouTube that highlights the difference between epidemics and pandemics, and then we'll unpack that a little bit more in detail in the rest of this Edpuzzle video. The link will pop up in a moment. All right, thank you for watching that short YouTube video. So basically an epidemic, we're looking at the spread of a particular pathogen within a restricted area or community. So this is where we're looking at different diseases or pathogens being spread within the one country or the one World Health Organization domain. And we don't tend to classify these outbreaks of diseases as pandemics until it's on a global scale. Okay, so we obviously know what we're living through right now with the coronavirus or COVID-19. We are in a pandemic because it is pretty much affecting every part of the world. There are hardly any countries that are untouched by this particular virus. So let's just have a look at some of the examples that I put on the screen here. And by no means are they an entire list of the epidemics or the pandemics that have occurred in human history, but they are probably some of the most well known. So in terms of epidemics, we've got things like SARS, which is closely linked to our current day coronavirus. It is a type of coronavirus that caused SARS back in 2002, 2003. But probably was way before your time because I don't think any of you were born then. Anyway, it was pretty scary at the time. People thought it was going to outbreak and become a pandemic, but it did remain localized to China and it did not, I guess, spread to the rest of the world. That's why it was classified as an epidemic. Same with cholera and Ebola, so pretty nasty diseases. And they are quite common, cholera is more common in third world countries just purely because of the fact they don't have a great medical system there. You'll notice on the screen here that some of these epidemics and pandemics have been written in either red text or blue text. The red text is indicating to you that this epidemic or pandemic has been caused by a virus, whereas the blue ones, so cholera and the Black Plague, were actually caused by a bacteria. So going back to that idea of the disease cholera in Haiti, Haiti is a third world country. They don't have great medical facilities, so it's much harder for them to treat a bacterial infection, and that's why it is classified as an epidemic in that country. If that was to outbreak somewhere, say, like Australia, you probably wouldn't even hear about it on the news because it's pretty quick to deal with. We've got a great, healthcare system, and we've got access to those antibiotics that would help combat that bacterial infection. The other bacterial one that was on the screen here, the Black Plague, you guys might know it as the bubonic plague. I think you guys talk about it in history or English. I don't know. It used to be part of the curriculum years ago. But the bubonic plague or the Black Plague caused by a bacteria that was passed from rats to humans. Obviously, if you think about 13 and 1400s, there was no medical care system existent then. So of course a bacteria is going to run rampant through, I'm going to say, millions of people, to the point where it impacted many, many countries and killed millions of people. It was quite scary actually. So I guess the main differences that you need to be aware of between the epidemics and the pandemics. Epidemic, localized, one country, that sort of thing. Pandemics is when it spills out of that country and it starts to impact other parts of the world and takes root there, spreading to pretty much anywhere it can get its hands on, really. Okay, So now we're going to talk about the transmission of pathogens. And again, you guys are going to all be experts on this because we know all about it due to the coronavirus. So we need to think about, I guess they're listed in those diagrams on the bottom there, but there's also some dot points on the screen there. The first four you guys should be pretty aware with. So direct contact with a person, exchanging bodily fluids, contamination or eating contaminated food, and obviously airborne, which is what we're worried about right now with coronavirus, you know, coughing or sneezing and transmitting those particles through the air to someone else. One that we haven't really discussed with coronavirus, and it's because coronavirus doesn't have one of these, is a vector. So a vector is another living organism that carries the virus or the bacteria, the pathogen that you're looking at, but is usually not harmed by that pathogen, and it's used to carry the pathogen to a host. So some examples of diseases that have vectors, the Zika virus, it was common in Africa. It was carried, or the vector was the mosquito. So the mosquito carried that virus, passed it on to humans. When we were just talking about the bubonic plague or the black plague, it was the fleas on rats that were carrying the bacteria and passing that bacteria to the humans, and then obviously humans got sick and died, that sort of thing. So vectors don't necessarily get sick themselves, but they do pass the pathogen from person to person. So just be aware of the different ways that pathogens can be transmitted. Like I said, the first four you guys are pretty familiar with because they're things that we need to be mindful of in our current state. And then that fifth one of vectors being another form of transmission for a pathogen. Okay, you also need to be able to identify different ways that we can control the spread of a disease. And again, you guys should be ready to go with this topic, no worries, because we're currently trying to do that with the pandemic we're living through. So, step one, or some of the first things that they're going to do, not necessarily in this order, but usually they are. So we need to stop travel to the locations where infected people are. We need to start wearing masks, changing our hygiene practices like washing your hands more regularly, making sure you're washing your hands with soap for 20+ seconds, those sorts of things. Making sure that you're coughing into your elbow and not your hand. They're all different strategies that we can use to prevent the spread of this disease. Another way that we can do that is to also isolate or quarantine infected people, so those that have a positive reading for the particular disease, or those that are showing symptoms. And that's the advice that we've been given currently with coronavirus, is if you are showing any signs of the disease, you need to go and get tested straight away. And from that point, you need to remain in isolation until you're given the all clear by the medical professionals. So we're isolating and quarantining to make sure that we're not furthering the spread of that disease. In certain diseases or for certain pathogens, you might also like to look at the eradication of vectors. So that's really not an issue with coronavirus, but it can be with other diseases. So for example, if the mosquitoes were the vectors that were carrying that particular pathogen from human to human, scientists might want to look at designing a drug or maybe a bug spray that might destroy the mosquito and prevent the mosquito from carrying that pathogen from person to person, and that would slow the spread of the disease. And I guess our end goal for most diseases that humans experience, especially on the pandemic level, is we need that vaccination. We want that vaccination so that we can create our artificial active immunity in people, so that if they are one day exposed to that pathogen, their body is naturally going to be able to fight it off, and they should not experience those severe symptoms or potentially death that they would experience if they had not been vaccinated.